afternoon. I said good afternoon. How's everybody doing? My name's ConneCT, and as we start off this morning, I wanted to share a story with you. It's about my first speaking engagement ever. So I'm driving to my first speaking engagement. I'm 21 years old, and I was super nervous. Because I'm sitting there in my car wondering, what are they going to think of me? What are they going to think of all of this on the right side of my body? And I pull up to the speaking engagement and I start to walk inside. And as I walk inside, I notice a policeman off in the corner. And he's walking kind of funny. In fact, he's dragging his foot. This means that me and him, well, we immediately have something in common. Because I drag my foot, I limp when I walk too. So I muster up some courage and I decide to approach him. And as I approach him, I introduce myself. And I say, hi, my name's Kelsey. When I was 5 years old, I had a brain tumor. And when I was 15, that brain tumor came back, and I had a stroke and woke up paralyzed. And I just wanted to let you know that seeing you here today really inspired me. If you can do all that you're doing, despite the challenges you face, I know I can too. And he turned to me, and he looked at me with just the kindest, sweetest eyes I've ever seen. And what he said to me that day, I will never forget. He turned to me and he said, young lady, I just stepped in dog poop and I'm trying to get it off my shoe. And he walked away like this. My name's ConneCT. And this afternoon, I want to talk to you all about perspective. But before I do just want to clear a few things up. First, I'm not limping, this is just swagger. And I'm not slurring my speech, I'm just talking in cursive. I know I'm paralyzed on my right side, but that's okay. I've always liked leftovers. I want to share my story with you all this afternoon. The story of my life with amazing nurses, like all of you. But more than anything, as we start off this afternoon, I want to start by saying thank you. It's such an honor to have the opportunity to speak to a group of people who have saved my life and the lives of so many others. So thank you so much for all that you do. I grew up in a big family. You see, I'm actually a triplet. Yes, there's 3 of me. I'm the pretty one. And I have older brother and sister who are twins. So my parents had twins and then they had triplets. They had 5 kids under the age of 3. So every night at the dinner table, there were 2 parents, 5 kids, and we also had 7 dogs. In fact, we used to go out to dinner a lot, and the waiter, the waitress would notice that there's twins and triplets, and she would say, what's next, quadruplets? My parents didn't think that that was funny. They thought it might happen. But I grew up in a big family and I had a lot of support, and this was really important because when I was just 5 years old, I started to get really sick. I started to rub my eyes all the time. I always wanted to be held and I was running into things. I was running into walls and doors. In fact, I was running into things so often that I had bloody marks all over my forehead and my head. And my parents, they took me to see some doctors, and the doctors told my parents that I was fine, that I was running into things because I wanted attention. Fortunately, my parents are doctors themselves, and knew that something was wrong and demanded that the doctors get an MRI, get pictures of my brain. And there on the MRI at 5 years old was a brain tumor. At the age of 5, I was diagnosed with cancer. Now, as I was in the MRI machine, my parents, they were out in the hallway with the doctor, the radiologist who was taking the picture. And as the pictures came up, they could very clearly see the brain tumor inside my head, about the size of a golf ball. And as those images came up, the radiologist, he turned to my parents and said, she has 2 weeks to live. And if we do surgery, she'll probably have a stroke and die anyways. But my parents didn't like this answer. You see, my parents believed something really important that day, that I was too young to believe or understand myself, which is that we always have a chance, things can always get better. No matter what our difficulties are, no matter what our challenges are, no matter how hard things get, things can always get better. And my parents, they believed that for me when I was 5 years old. So against doctor and hospital wishes, they took me out of that hospital that day and they flew me to Boston Children's Hospital, which is world-renowned for their treatment of kids with brain tumors. In particular, the type of brain tumor I had, which was a visual pathway astrocytoma, also known as an optic glioma. So the reason why I was running into things all the time is because I had lost my right side peripheral vision. I couldn't see to the right. In fact, the brain tumor was so bad, so severe, that they did surgery the very next day. After surgery, I spent the summer having radiation treatment, and within 1 year, I was cancer-free. My brain tumor had gone away. We always have a chance, things can always get better. No matter what our difficulties are, no matter what our challenges are, we always have a chance, things can always get better. After my brain tumor went away, my life was great. In fact, truthfully, it wasn't just great, it was extraordinary. Now, I grew up in Orlando, Florida, and I was tall and funny and pretty and talented, and I just happened to be a world champion athlete. See, if you know Orlando, if you know Florida, you know that there's water everywhere, and we lived on the water, we lived on a lake, and by the time I was 13, I was ranked 3rd in the world and 2nd in the United States for girls wakeboarding. Now, if you don't know what wakeboarding is like surfing or snowboarding, but you're behind a boat and your feet are strapped in and the boat pulls you, so it's like this. Okay, I know what you're thinking, guys. I know I look weird now, but back then I was smoking hot. And I felt like I was on top of the world. I felt like every day was the best day ever. I was smart and funny and pretty and talented, and I was a world champion athlete. The hard things were in the past. But if there's one thing I've learned in life, that life can change so quickly, which is why it's important that we find happiness every day. Because we never know when our life's going to change. And in the 10th grade, 10 years after my first brain tumor, I started to have seizures. I would just get a bad taste in my mouth and my face would turn red. And at first, it was just 1 or 2 a month. But then I started having them every week, and then I started having them every day. And I was sitting in class one day, and I had one of my triplet sister, Erica, saw, and she told my parents. And my parents, they took me back to see those doctors, who ordered another MRI, more pictures of my brain, and there on the MRI was my brain tumor. My brain tumor had come back after being gone for 10 years. 10 years of birthdays, 10 years of being with my family and friends, knowing I no longer had a brain tumor, and just like this, my life changed. My worst fear, my parents' worst fear had come true. We couldn't believe it. We were shocked. And while I thought that they would just go and do surgery again, take it out, and then my life would start to get back to normal, this ended up not being the case. Now, they did do surgery and they did take it out. In fact, not only did they do surgery and take it out, but they did surgery 10 years to the day of the first surgery. Wow. June 14th, 1996, June 14th, 2006, same neurosurgeon, same anesthesiologist, same hospital, 10 years to the day. And this time the surgery went really well. This time they got all of the tumor. But I'm lying in bed after surgery, I'm lying in bed, and all I hear the doctors say to my parents is stroke, stroke. She had a stroke, she woke up paralyzed. And I'm screaming, and I'm screaming, and I'm saying, stroke? I can't have a stroke. I'm 15 years old. I'm a world champion athlete. What are you talking about? But no one can hear me. Because not only am I completely paralyzed on the right side of my body, my face looks like Play-Doh because I've lost all my facial muscles. I can't move my arm or my hand or my leg or my foot. Not only am I completely paralyzed on the right side of my body, and I was right-handed, but I can't speak either. So all these emotions that I'm having, all these things that I'm trying to share with my doctors and the nurses and my parents, well, the words aren't even coming out of my mouth. They can't even hear me. And I found myself getting really upset, in fact scared, and going deeper and deeper into this dark black hole of depression and misery and pity, just feeling sorry for myself. Not realizing there was this amazing, beautiful world out there that I was missing out on. Have you ever felt like that? You're at work one day, you're at the hospital, and you're just having the worst day ever? Raise hands. Anybody in here ever have a really bad day, like the worst day ever? Okay. So you're having the worst day ever, right? And you don't think that things get any worse, and then you come back the next day and things are worse. And then they mess up your mocha latte at Starbucks. I know! And we find ourselves complaining about problems that other people in this world wish that they had. Feel lucky. Your worst day is better than the best day of most people on this planet. In fact, truthfully, my worst day. My worst day in a hospital bed, completely paralyzed on the right side of my body, is still better than most people's best days. Why? Well, I had food, water, clothing, shelter, people who loved me and cared about me and believed in me, and I was alive. But it's so easy for us, right, when we're having a hard day, to not see the good, right? To not realize how great our lives really are. So the next time you're having a hard day, I encourage you to ask yourself why. Why are you here at this conference? Why do you do the work you do, and why does it matter? And then remember what an incredible difference you make in the lives of patients and their families every day. No, you're not just helping patients get better. You're restoring lives and families. You're giving people their freedom back. You're helping kids get back to school and adults get back to work. You're literally saving people's lives, and that's powerful work. We can sometimes lose sight of that. But when we remember why we do what we do, it makes it easier to get through even the hardest days and the hardest things that we have to do. After all, everybody relies on being healthy, and when we're sick, we rely on you. When I had a stroke, when I woke up paralyzed, it was so easy for me to not see the good, to not realize that there were good things in the future. In fact, being paralyzed was like being a fish stuck in an aquarium. I do not really care for fish, she said. When asked, it was funny. I do not really care for fish, she said, when asked if she wanted to visit the aquarium. Being paralyzed is like being a member of another species. She was just like those fish, stuck in a place where she did not belong. How scary it was to be trapped in an aquarium. Her fingers could no longer move, her hand could no longer write, her wrist could no longer go up and down. In fact, she no longer had a hand in her arm. Her arm was now a fin. Her paralyzed arm, just like a fin, the kind that's been hit by a boat. How scary it was to be trapped. Everything taken away from her, just like the fish in the aquarium. Her legs were like flippers, she only truly had one. And while she may have been able to swim, she could not walk, she could not run, just like the fish in the aquarium. Where do you want to go today? What do you want to do? But choosing to stay in one place was the only true freedom she knew. But it's the largest aquarium in the world. No, she did not want to go look at creatures in their unnatural environments as long as she was living in one of her own. See, when I had a stroke, when I woke up paralyzed at 15, it was so easy for me. It was so easy for me to sit in my misery and sit in my pity and sit in my pain, sitting on the couch with a pint of Haagen-Dazs coffee ice cream. And to just curl up into a ball and not realize there was this amazing, beautiful world out there that I was missing out on. But I'm fortunate that I had doctors and nurses and parents who encouraged me to go out into the world. And eventually something clicked, and I decided, did I want to get bitter or did I want to get better? And I wanted to get better. I think you all know more than anybody that we don't have control over things in life. You can call it God, you can call it fate, you can call it Fred from accounting. Darn it! Note to self, take that one out. Things happen, right? Life happens. We can't change that, but what we can do is we can make the most out of the situation situations that we're given and have a great life in spite of the challenges that we face. Because I found that our hardest obstacles actually have the most rewarding opportunities. We just don't see them while we're going through them. So at 15 years old, at 16 years old, I finally snapped out of it. In fact, it started with the day that I was lying in that hospital bed, feeling sorry for myself, and suddenly I could lift my leg up. I couldn't move my arm, but one day I was lying in the hospital bed, and suddenly I could lift my leg up. And as the right side of my body started to work again, I realized I had a choice. I could sit in that hospital bed, I could sit in that wheelchair for the rest of my life, or I could fight. And it was time to fight. So after about a year in a hospital bed in a wheelchair, very slowly I moved to a walker, and then to a cane, and now it's been 15 years, and not only can I walk on my own, but I'm fully independent. Life is all about our decisions. In fact, I believe that our life is all about perspective. When we change our attitude, when we change our perspective, we can change the way we react to the hard things that we're going through. When we change our perspective, we can change the way we react to the hard things that we're going through. And when we change the way we react, we can change the outcome. It's all about our attitude, it's all about perspective. And for me personally, I figured out my why. Why get up? Why keep going? Why try harder? Because I had so much more to do and achieve in this world than sit in a hospital bed in a wheelchair for the rest of my life. That's just not something I wanted to do. See, change is inevitable, it's going to happen. There's nothing we can do about that. Change is going to happen whether we want it to or not, because change is inevitable. But how we deal with that change can be remarkable if we let it be. Now, my differences, my challenges, they show very clearly on the outside. They're fully exposed to the world to see. Everybody can see them. Mine, they show on the outside. But I believe we all have differences and we all have challenges. In fact, I believe we're all hiding something. We're all going through things that we feel like we have no control over. In fact, it was less than 3 months after I had a stroke and woke up paralyzed that I went back to school. And I went back to school still in a wheelchair. And you know what happened? I immediately lost all my friends. You see, I was different and they didn't know how to treat me. It seemed as though in life, especially in high school and middle school, but even as we go on to be adults, if we don't fit in, we stand out. And boy, did I stand out. But as soon as I got out of that wheelchair and moved past the walker and moved past the cane and could finally walk on my own, I realized something. If I slow down my walking so my limp almost goes away, and I stick my hand into a sweatshirt or jacket pocket like this, it was almost as if no one seemed to notice or care that I was different. It was like my disability, my differences, the best things about me that I wanted so hard to hide, suddenly they disappeared. People didn't notice. And for about 10 years, I kept my hand in my pocket and tried to hide my disability and my differences to fit in. What I was really doing is I was trying to hide my differences and my challenges so that other people would like me. Now, let me just be honest. I think we're all hiding something, and some things are good to hide. But those things that make you, that make you different and unique and special, those are your good qualities. That's what gives you perspective. A different perspective that other people don't have. And when we hide those qualities from the companies we work with, the organizations we're a part of, and our colleagues, they lose the opportunity to gain a new perspective too. They lose the opportunity to gain a new perspective, to see our gifts and our talents and our abilities, because at the end of the day, I believe that's why we're all here and why this matters. Because we all have different values and we all have different perspectives that we can bring to the table. And for me, it was once I finally took my hand out of my pocket that my life changed forever. That I learned to love who I was before I had a stroke and who I am now, even though I'm different. Now I believe, as I said earlier, I think we're all different. In fact, not only do I think we're all different, but I think we're all paralyzed in some way. Me? I am physically paralyzed. I had a stroke, I woke up paralyzed. But I believe that there are things that are paralyzing all of us. It's our limiting beliefs, our feeling of self-worth. The things we try to hide from other people that we don't want them to see. But as my good friend W. Mitchell says, it's not what happens to us in life, it's what we do about it. And we need to focus on the things we do have and that we can do, not the things we don't have and that we can't do. After all, how many young stroke patients does it take to screw in a light bulb? One! Haven't you all been paying attention? I can totally do it myself. But I can do it myself because I have amazing nurses like all of you who showed me how to, who taught me how to, and helped me realize that I could. When I think about the patient experience and taking care of patients, I think it's important that we think differently, try differently, and learn to adapt if we want to move forward. And when I think about these things, I think about Steve Jobs and Apple. What a lot of people don't know about Steve Jobs, founder and former CEO of Apple, is that Steve Jobs started Apple, then he was fired from Apple, and then he got rehired to Apple. He started it, he was fired, he got rehired. And in a 2005 commencement speech that Steve Jobs gave at Stanford University, he said, and I quote, "Getting fired from Apple was one of the best things that's ever happened to me. Having 2 brain tumors and a stroke and waking up to find the right side of my body completely paralyzed was one of the best things that's ever happened to me." In the moment when it happened, no. I was 15 and all I wanted was to be normal. But now, 15 years later, absolutely. When Steve Jobs returned to Apple in 1997, one of the first things they did was come out with the Think Differently commercial. A commercial that's truly changed my life that I think embodies what you all do as nurses every day, which is to change the world. And I want to share it with you. It goes like this. Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs and the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. In fact, one of the only things you can't do is ignore them because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to believe that they can change the world are the ones who do. I believe we're all crazy enough to change the world. Sometimes it's something that we lose from childhood on to adulthood, but I believe that as nurses, you all are changing the world every day because you think differently, try differently, and adapt when you need to. When I think about these things again, thinking differently, trying differently, and learning to adapt, I think it's really important to realize that there is more than one way to try and more than one way to think. And if we're having trouble doing things the way that other people do it, it doesn't mean that we can't do it. Sometimes we just have to learn to do things differently. Now, when I had a stroke and I woke up paralyzed, there were 2 types of people in my life. There were my nurses and my doctors and my parents who told me, you can learn to do anything you want with one hand, your non-dominant hand, if you're willing to try, fail, and try again. And then there were the other people in my life. Now raise your hand if you have some of these. These are called the naysayers. Does anybody have naysayers in their life? Any naysayers? Okay. So there were my parents and my doctors and my nurses and people who believed that I could learn to do anything with one hand, my non-dominant hand. And then there were the naysayers, and these are the ones who said, no, you can't, you'll never, that's impossible. It got to a point where people said, no, you can't, you'll never, that's impossible. That anytime someone told me I could not or would not be able to do something with one hand that most people do with 2, I did it just to prove them wrong. It was a game and I was really, really good at it. But I only had this ability to do this, only had this philosophy of pushing back like that because of a nurse and a physical therapist who changed my life. I had my surgeries at Boston Children's in Boston, Massachusetts. But after a few months at Boston Children's, recovering from my surgery, it was time for me to go to a rehab hospital to start to use the right side of my body again. While Boston Children's was the best medical hospital for me, the best rehab hospital was actually in Atlanta, Georgia. It's called the Shepherd Center. So when it was time, my parents flew me from Boston to Atlanta so I could start my rehab at the Shepherd Center. My dad rented a car when we got there and we drove to the Shepherd Center. And as we arrived, he got out of the car and came around, lifted me up and put me in the wheelchair because I was still completely paralyzed. And I remember looking up, it was 6 o'clock at night and there was a beautiful sunset. And I remember looking up at that sunset and thinking, things are never going to get better. I'm going to be in this wheelchair forever. Boy, was I wrong. Now, founder and former CEO of the Shepherd Center, Mrs. Shepherd, greeted us at the door as she tries to do with all new patients and walked us to my new room. And when we arrived to my new room, there was a nurse and a physical therapist there waiting for us. And I asked them to give me a shower because the nurses at Boston Children's had been giving me showers every night. But this day was different. You see, this day they insisted, well, they asked politely, but they insisted, you know, that we wait till the next morning. So the next morning came around, 7 a.m., and I thought that they were going to give me a shower, but this day was different. Some of you already know what's going to happen. Yeah. You can tell from this side of the room. This day was different. You see, this day, they rolled me in the shower, turned on the water, handed me a bar of soap, and walked out of the room. And you know what happened? I dropped the bar of soap. So here I am, 15 years old, completely paralyzed on the right side of my body, water's beating down on me, and I've now dropped the bar of soap. Now, they came in 15, 20 seconds later and showed me how to give myself a shower, how to bathe myself with one hand. While they knew that I would walk again, at the time we did not know how much of my right arm and hand were going to come back. And they did this for a reason. They let me fail for a reason. You see, failure is a part of life, right? We're all going to fail. But now that I had a stroke and woke up paralyzed and was going to have to learn to use my non-dominant hand, I wasn't just going to fail once or twice or 3 times. I was going to fail 5, 10, 15, 100 times before I learned to do something with one hand that most people did with 2. But then that one time I get it, and I'd be able to do that thing, again, that most people do with 2. So by sticking me in the shower that day, turning on the water, handing me a bar of soap, walking out of the room and letting me fail, what they were really doing was they were setting me up for success for the rest of my life. I still remember this experience to this day. I can picture it in my head because it was one of the most valuable, important lessons that I was taught after I'd had a stroke. Is that I could learn, because anything can be done differently, I would just have to be willing to try, fail, and get back up and try again. In fact, does anybody here know the band Rascal Flatts? Do I have any Rascal Flatts fans in here? A few? I love Rascal Flatts, and Rascal Flatts has a song, it's called Stand, and it goes like this. And no, I'm not going to sing that. I'm not going there. I'm going to say it. When push comes to shove, we find out what we're made of. We might bend till we break because it's all we can take. On our knees, we look up, decide we've had enough. We get mad, we get strong, wipe our hands, shake it off, then we stand. Every time I got pushed over, every time someone said, no, you can't, you'll never, every time I failed, I got back up and I tried again. Because of all of you. Because I had a nurse and a physical therapist who taught me that I could. This again was one of the most valuable, important lessons that anybody ever taught me, especially after I had a stroke and woke up paralyzed. So, because of this lesson that you all taught me, by the age of 17, 2 years after I had a stroke and woke up paralyzed, I could do almost everything with one hand that most people do with 2. besides a cartwheel and a handstand that does not count. So I could type and write and take a shower and brush my teeth and tie my shoes, and I had learned to do all these things with one hand that most people do with two. But what I hadn't figured out how to do yet was to put my hair up into a ponytail and do a bun with one hand. And this was really important because at the time I was in 11th grade, but I was doing all of my schoolwork on a computer, so that I could be in a very intense physical therapy program that was 12 to 15 hours a week. Right? And so I always needed my hair put up. My goal after I had a stroke was to run again, and I did, because of this intense physical therapy program. So I always had to ask someone, and at that point, 17 years old, I hadn't had to ask people to do much for me anymore. I had figured most of it out, right? So I went into therapy one day to occupational therapy, which I'm sure you all know, shoulder, arm, hand, and I said to the occupational therapist, today's the day that I want to learn to put my hair up into a ponytail, into a bun with one hand. And you know what she said to me? She was a naysayer. She said, I've never seen anybody do that before. I don't think you can. Oh, that was the wrong thing to say.
But you can try.
I can try. And then when she said that to me, I remembered the lesson that you all taught me. That I can learn to do anything with one hand that most people do too. I just had to be willing to try, fail, and try again. It took me 1 hour to learn to put my hair into a ponytail into a bun that day, and she got fired. I'm kidding! She didn't get fired, but here's the thing. She never told anybody they couldn't do something ever again. There's always another way to try. There's always another way to think. We just have to be willing to adapt. So before I move on, I thought I'd show you all how I put my hair up. Do you want to see? I'm going to do this. It's going to be a little awkward. Now, am I going to do this the way that everybody else does it? No. I adapted and learned to do it differently because of what you all taught me.
There it is.
There's always another way to try. There's always another way to think. Sometimes we just have to adapt and learn to do things differently. And you all taught me that. When I think about my relationship with you all, with my nurses, I think about how I wouldn't be here without you all. You all are the ones that kept the closest eye on me throughout my whole surgical process. You all are the ones that took care of me and were there for me. Without the amazing perioperative nurses I had, I'm certain I wouldn't be speaking here today. My physical, mental, and emotional outcome would not have been as good if it weren't for all of you. Again, as I said, you all did everything for me. You prepared me for surgery and you answered all my questions. As they took me back to the operating room and I started to fall asleep, you held my hand so that I wasn't scared. And as I fell asleep, you all started preparing the surgical site on my head so that they could do the surgery. A few months before my surgery, when we found out that my brain tumor was going to come back, or had come back rather, I went to go see my doctors in Boston. And when I went to go see them, they asked me what I was most afraid of. And all I could think of is that I didn't want my head shaved. I didn't want to lose all my long, beautiful hair again. I had lost it all when I was 5. And when I woke up from surgery that day, I was so happy to see that all of my hair was still there. What I didn't know then, what I found out a few years later, is that you're the ones that made sure that my head wasn't shaved. When it was time to prepare the surgical site on my head, you all remembered that I said that I didn't want my head shaved. So you just took a little strip right here, and you left hair on both sides, so that after surgery I could go like this. I still remember that today because it was one of the kindest, nicest things that anybody has ever done for me. You all did that. You all made that happen for me. In a world where I was going through so much, you all took the extra time to do that for me. After surgery, I was having trouble maintaining my body temperature, and you all applied warming blankets and constantly made sure I was comfortable. When I was having trouble eating and swallowing, you all turned to smoothies and liquids so that they wouldn't have to put a feeding tube in. And one afternoon, when my heart rate went down to 30 beats per minute, you all rushed in and acted so quickly. You sat me up and patted me on the back until my heart rate came back up. In fact, it was a perioperative nurse who was the first to realize and notice that I wasn't moving the right side of my body after my surgery, and you quickly alerted the rest of the care team. The rest of the care team rely on you because you all are the ones who know the patients the best. And once you realized that I was paralyzed, you did everything for me. You fed me, bathed me, helped me go to the bathroom, sat me up when I needed to sit up, and it was like it wasn't even your job. You were happy to do it, and you taught my parents how to do it as well. In fact, one of the most important things I think that you all did was engage with my family and encourage them. Sometimes I think that it was harder on them than it was for me. They were devastated. You told them that you had other patients who had gone through what I was going through, who regained quite a bit of function, and helped them to not dwell in the misery of the moment, but rather encourage me to keep working hard. That certainly put them in the right mindset for my recovery. Today, because of all of you, I'm doing 1,000 times more than I ever thought I would. You were there when my world came crashing down. And today, because of all of you, my world is filled with possibilities. I know many of you are parents, and all of you sacrifice time away from your family and friends to help your patients, and I want to thank you for that. You may not always see it, and certainly don't get the recognition or credit you deserve, but you're making an incredible difference in the lives of patients and their families every day. You all make sure that patients like me pull through life-threatening situations like brain surgery. Each of you is also a part of the hope and joy and magic of a patient's recovery, where kids like me heal, get better, and then get to go home. So thank you so much for all that you do. Before I end today, I want to share one final story. Can I share one final story with you all? It's about a boy. Yes. Let's all repeat what she just did. Ooh. Oh. I know. So, when I went off to college, I decided not to let anything hold me back. So I actually studied abroad 4 times. Something I was told I would never be able to do. Now, I didn't go on like year-long trips or semester trips. I went on spring break and over the summer, so they were 2 or 3 week trips. But I wanted to explore as much as I could. I was actually undecided for 2 years, so I was able to go and do whatever I wanted. I took electives and I studied abroad. As a freshman, I went and I studied abroad in Costa Rica, went and studied ecotourism, even though at the time I had no idea what ecotourism was. I just went, I'm like, I'm going. I actually signed up 2 days before the deadline. You see, my triplet sisters and my older brother and sister had gone on a study abroad trip over the summer, and I didn't go because I was doing physical therapy. I spent all of my summer doing very intense physical therapy, and one of the students that went on that trip was going to study abroad in Costa Rica. So I said, I'm going. And I went to Costa Rica. It changed my life. Then I went and I studied abroad in Paris. Then I was supposed to go to Rome, but it got canceled, so I went back to Paris. And then my last year of college, I went and I studied abroad in Greece. And I was getting ready to board the plane to Greece when I met Josh. Josh was tall, handsome, southern, and he just happened to be a little different, like me. See, Josh was a Paralympic athlete. He lost his leg in Iraq, and he still works for the military today. His leg went down to his knee and stopped with a stub. He had no knee, he had no lower leg, he had no foot. But Josh didn't live his life focused on the leg he did not have. I got to know Josh over the years. In fact, we even went out on a few dates. I know.
Gets better.
He was smoking hot too. And what I realized very quickly about Josh is that Josh didn't live his life focused on what he did not have or what he could not do. You see, even with two crutches and only one full leg, he still managed to open the car door and the restaurant door for me before I could get to them.
Ooh.
Josh lived his life focused on what he did have, what he could do, and how he could help other people. And he appreciated the unique gifts and values of each individual person around him. Here's the thing. I speak to Josh often. And every time I speak to Josh, I feel inspired. And a little part of me feels ashamed. You see, if Josh can live this incredible life he lives, despite the challenges he faces, and be a world champion athlete for a second time on top of that, why was I complaining? Josh inspired me more than anybody I've ever met in my entire life. He changed my attitude. He changed my perspective. In fact, I truly believe that Josh is more alive now than he was before he got injured. Because he has gratitude and he has perspective. And he accomplishes more now than he ever did before because he made a conscious decision. He made a conscious decision not to let his disability or differences keep him from reaching his goals and dreams in life. He persevered. He succeeded in spite of them. And just like me, Josh would not be where he is today without amazing nurses like all of you. And as I end with you all today, I hope that my story and the experiences I've shared with you have been a nice reminder of what a difference you're making in the lives of patients and their families every day. I hope that I've helped you to see the challenges you face at home, at work, and in your personal lives a little bit differently too. When you're having a hard day, when you're struggling, I encourage you to take a step back and remember why you do what you do. Remember that the difference you're making in the lives of others every day is remarkable. Becoming a nurse is a great accomplishment, but I believe it takes an incredibly special person to set out with the goal of helping others and putting others before yourself, like I believe all of you do every day. Josh, me, and all the patients that you have served and continue to serve would not be where we are or come as far as we have without you. So from the bottom of my heart, I say thank you. I hope that you guys have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much for your time.